Welcome back to Autism Live. We love this new segment that we've got that's called Ask an Autism Expert. Joining us via a lot of different mechanical, technological things is Gabriel Meyer. And Gabe, we're so excited to have you on the show for the first time. Tell us a little bit about what your role is at the Center for Autism and Related Disorders.
Okay. Well, I'm excited to be on the show, Shannon. I currently am clinical lead manager for now a number of different centers. Previously, I worked at our Santa Clarita Center in California, and now one of the roles that I've taken on is, because our family moved to Wisconsin, I'm supporting offices in some of our high-growth regions in Virginia, Maryland, Louisiana, where maybe we don't have that clinical lead support in those offices, and we want to make sure that the supervisors there are getting the support that they need, that the families are getting the clinical quality oversight that they need, and just kind of troubleshooting any other issues that come up, working with the operations team and those that are there on the ground in those states.
What a wonderful, wonderful thing to do. So, Gabe, we have some questions that some of our listeners and viewers wrote in, and I'm going to ask you the first one. It's how can I know, this is such a great question, how can I know when I should start potty training my son? He is 3 and nonverbal.
Yeah, there's a number of things that you need to consider at this point. Obviously, being 3 years old, the mom is kind of right to start looking towards potty training. The problem is that sometimes we want to make sure that the child has all the prerequisites necessary for potty training to begin. One of the big ones is going to be, can this individual or this child withhold their urine and their bowel movements for long enough? And so what you would need to do is you kind of need to make sure that you're tracking how often you're having to change the child, and usually you're looking for, at least, a couple of hours they need to be able to withhold. The other big factor here is that this child is nonverbal, which isn't necessarily a barrier to this child being successful with beginning the potty training process. The issue here would be, does the child have any sort of communicative skills? If they're on a PEG system or an augmentative communication system, then we might be able to get them to learn some of the indicative procedures that they need to follow. Maybe saying they need to go potty, or pressing a button on their iPad that indicates that they need to go. One of the areas you could start with this is just getting them to identify wet versus dry. It could be really helpful, so that way they can discriminate between those two things. But ultimately, there's just a few of those prerequisites that we need to try, and then if your child meets that criteria, and even the communication part of it doesn't necessarily even need to happen. If they're withholding long enough, we can really start bringing them to the bathroom on an interval, and getting them to at least try to capture that moment where they are going to the bathroom while they're on the potty. But again, there'd just be a couple of things we'd want to evaluate for your child first.
One of my favorite things in talking to autism experts, in the autism community and among parents, there is this great fear that what if we aren't able to potty train our child, and we all have these nightmares about how, one of the first things that was said to me as a parent, once my son was diagnosed, and somebody was trying to make me feel better, and they were saying to me, oh, I have a friend and her child has autism and he's doing great. And I was like, really? Tell me about him. What's he like? Oh, well, he's 15. He's not potty trained yet. And I had nightmares about that, right? I was just like, oh, and I think a lot of autism parents have this great, great fear. But I love hearing experts talk about it, because you guys are kind of amazing in your attitude towards it, that you really have cracked the code on potty training, that when it's done properly, and you guys all love the Fox and Azrin method because you know that it works, that really you can have great success with potty training. And I have yet to hear of a single child that they were not able to potty train. Some take longer than others, but that pretty much everybody across the board, I don't want to say everybody because if there's a medical issue that can make it harder, but pretty much everybody gets potty trained, and it's not this big loop-de-loop. So I appreciate you giving us some of those precursors to know when it's time, but I hope that everybody takes a deep breath and realizes that this is very, 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 very doable for kiddos.
Absolutely.
And I loved your assurance. You were like, well, and we can do that. I just love that attitude. So I'm going to move on to the next question. They write, my son is 11 and he has a lot of issues. Recently, my sisters suggested I get him looked at for Asperger's, which I looked up and it doesn't even exist anymore. Can an 11-year-old get diagnosed with autism? I saw that Amy Schumer's husband got diagnosed. He's a chef. Maybe I don't know what autism is. What should I be looking for in an 11-year-old?
Well, there's a lot of things to unpack in this question, right?
Yeah.
So the fact that an 11-year-old absolutely can be diagnosed, that is something that I want to assure, anyone. Honestly, anybody can be diagnosed if they meet the diagnostic criteria for autism. And the reality is, no, you don't need to have somebody assessed for Asperger's. Asperger's is just a kind of another form of autism that we've kind of now integrated in the new DSM-5 criteria. It's all within the autism spectrum kind of umbrella at this point. But previously, Asperger's, I think what this person would have been referring to would have been that their child kind of meets criteria for being high-functioning individual. And so when we talk about that, when we talk about the domains that an individual that's 11 years old that hasn't yet been diagnosed, I'm sure that this child probably has a lot of prerequisite skills, probably has language, probably has a lot of these adaptive skill sets that we'd probably expect about an 11-year-old to have. But it wouldn't be surprising that if this individual does kind of meet the criteria for autism, that maybe they're demonstrating some deficits in areas like their social responsivity, their understanding of areas like emotion, some of their executive functioning process. Maybe they're just really disorganized. They could be experiencing some of the other things that kind of come along with having autism. Maybe they're depressed because they're struggling socially. So there's a lot of reasons that maybe this individual should get that diagnosis, because then people like CARD and our therapist team here and supervisors here can develop a program that would be appropriate for this individual, that would meet them where they are. We don't need to start everybody with a program that's highly intensive with regard to language, but we could actually evaluate the domains that this child is specifically struggling within, and then see what we could do in terms of a treatment plan for them.
So you mentioned a couple of different things to be looking for, that if they're struggling socially, if they're struggling with, you were saying really, really disorganized and not being able to keep things together. Because one of the things this mom was saying, like what should I be looking for? It is this whole, they call it a spectrum, because there is a spectrum of people, and people can have different symptoms. I love the saying, when you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, right? So it's kind of hard to pin down, but I always wonder why, when you get to this point where somebody else is saying, maybe you should have your child looked at for, and let's imagine that it was, that they said tonsillitis, or that they said maybe you should have your child looked at for shin splints, right? Hopefully we're all getting our kids to a pediatrician on a semi-regular basis for well checks. I just don't know what the harm is in asking, right? Because, excuse me, it doesn't mean that your child's going to be labeled forever to ask. And the truth is, as you were saying, if you are at someplace like CARD, they can help your child to overcome whatever their deficits are, no matter what they classify it as. So my question is, why not get it checked out to be sure? What do you think about that?
Just on that topic, I think that absolutely get it checked out. And it is a bummer. And even, this parent brought up Amy Schumer, and Amy Schumer has kind of drawn a lot of tension recently with regard to kind of bringing up how, it's that stigma that her and her husband are trying to kind of fight against. It's too bad that there is a stigma attached to the autism diagnosis, because in this child's case in particular, they could really benefit from services like what we can provide at CARD, but any ABA services from any provider. It doesn't need to be a CARD, just that these individuals have access to treatment. And the sad part is that even an individual that is operating decent in a number of domains where maybe that they haven't needed that diagnostic evaluation, or that diagnosis previously. Now that they're running into some of these challenges, you know, the only other options for support is maybe like a once a week therapy session with a CBT psychotherapist, right? And that'd be great that they meet with a psychologist once a week, but we would get to maybe meet with that individual on a more regular basis, and really apply. And not saying that they wouldn't benefit from that CBT, but man, it would be great to even collaborate with that professional, that other professional, and then apply a lot of what maybe the cognitive behavioral therapist is recommending for that individual in a setting where, you know, our therapist can go to the mall, can go to potentially the school with that individual, and really work on some of these goals in the environments in which they need to be learned. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that they brought up and you brought up Amy Schumer and her husband. Man, we are all loving on Amy Schumer right now. The things that she has been saying, you know, I was saying last week that she and her husband could have decided to keep this very quiet, and they didn't have to come forward and say anything at all. He is a successful chef. They are happily married and have a baby on the way. They did not need to, for their sakes, to come out and say, hey, by the way, here's what you should know about us. But the fact that they did, and that she has been so positive, I was saying to you, I think she's done more for the autism community and awareness in the last 2 weeks than probably the rest of us have done in the last 2 years, which, you know, we've all been trying to make sure that people know that autism is not something to be feared. But Amy Schumer is saying, you know, one of the things that I realized when my husband was diagnosed was that all of the traits that qualify him for being on the autism spectrum are the reasons why I fell in love with him. Oh my goodness. If I ever meet her, I'm going to hug her.
It's a great utilization of her platform. It really is. And when you have the ability to reach that many people and kind of, you know, change some things, it's great that she's utilizing her platform for that.
Absolutely. Really wonderful. But definitely for this mom, get your child looked at. Do that without fear, knowing that, like anything else, if they see that your child has a deficit in something, that even if it's a social deficit, there are things that can help. And I love that you recommended doing ABA, but also having a cognitive behavior therapist when kids are older. Super, super great. Okay, moving on to the last question here. My daughter is 4. We are card clients, and she's making great progress. My question is, how can I get my husband to learn what the therapists are doing? It's not that he doesn't care, he just doesn't know what to do, and when I try to teach him, he doesn't get it. And I'm going to guess, too, that creates friction between mom and dad when mom's trying to train dad. So what do you recommend, Gabe?
A number of things. We have a parent support program. It's part of the CARD model. So not only do we have our clinics and the therapy that your child should attend, but optimally, you know, obviously we require at least one parent, but it would be so great if both parents were attending all parent meetings. And you know, I like to call them parent meetings because a lot of times they get, you know, labeled as parent trainings. But yeah, in this situation, dad could probably benefit from a parent meeting where maybe we really worked on the behavior interventions that you know, we have currently in place for her daughter, and really allow the BCBA on their team to be the one that articulates that information to dad, maybe models and demonstrates some of that information, because mom's probably in the process of still learning as well. So it'd be great if both parents got to attend together. It could be an opportunity for them to really, you know, become more aligned on the treatment for their daughter, and really understanding what's happening there. And yeah, you're right. It would allow for mom to maybe not have to be in the position that she's in currently, which is disseminating all of that information to dad when she's trying to, you know, absorb it and understand it herself as well.
Yeah, you know, when we found out about CARD, we found out from another family. They recommended CARD to us, and really were our Eskimos coming to CARD. And one of the first things that the mom said was, you're going to have a clinic, and you need to attend that clinic like it's the most important thing in your world. You're going to rearrange your entire life around going to that clinic. And she said, oh, and by the way, it's not just for you to go. Your husband has to get off of work to go. And she said, there, you know, federal law provides for, your employer has to let you out for it. I know none of us wants to do that. None of us wants to go to the employer and say, hey, once a month, I'm going to have to take this, part of this morning off for the next year to 2 to 3 to, it was 5 years in our case. Nobody wants to go to the employer and say that, but the truth is you're protected, that they cannot fire you over that. They cannot pass you up for promotion over that. It's law. So know that. But I think back now about how much, because this mom said before we even started, and she said, this is what you have to do if you want to be successful. That was then what we did. And I met people along the way, I still meet parents who are like, yeah, but we just can't. And I know I would have said that, Gabe. I know I would have said that, but this mom said to me, no. Rearrange your life, prioritize that. You both need to be there. And even with both of us there, I learned things faster because I was at home more. I was working from home. And at a certain point, my husband came to me and said, I don't get it. Why does he do this for Peter? And why does he do this for this therapist? And he does it for you, but he doesn't do it for me. And I was not very generous at that point. I said to my husband, well, you better learn this. You better pay attention. You better get on the bandwagon. But we had a great supervisor who said to me, you need to not be there some of the times so that Dad is the only person, because I'm such a strong personality that I would always jump in. And she said, you need to be unavailable. You need to go shopping or something. But I think back all the time, Gabe, on that and think, my husband and my son are so close. They have such a good relationship, and it's because he learned how to do what the therapist did. So I appreciate that you're telling them that they both should go to these clinics, that it's important.
And ultimately, even if for whatever reason there's some sort of other additional barriers, reach out to your supervisor. See what the supervisor can do in terms of accommodating schedules. Maybe we can create additional time that's outside of the working time. It can be challenging, and maybe there's some times where Dad can get off work a little bit early, and that supervisor can be available for a parent training in the evening. I can't make promises for any particular supervisor, and it ultimately comes down to just that old saying, hey, my mom always said all you can do is ask.
That's right.
And so where there's a will, there's a way. And if your husband is interested and cares, then just ask and see what kind of accommodations can be made.
Absolutely. Don't give up on your husband. Pull him into this, because it will make a difference. Gabe, you've been fabulous. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. And for those of you who are in a place where CARD is starting to come to, maybe you'll get to meet Gabe in your travels. And we'll look forward to having you back again on the show, Gabe.
Sounds good, Shannon.
All right, you take care.
Yeah, you too.
Bye-bye. So wonderful, our expert for the day. I'm going to hang up there. And we are going to take a break. I'm looking at the time. Oh, yeah, we're late to talk to Bonnie. I'm just late today. So we're going to take a break, and then we're going to be back with Bonnie Yates, special education attorney. Stick with us.